Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Just north of downtown St. Louis on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River is a 1,200-acre site operated by the Tri-City Regional Port District. The Port District operates an intermodal freight transportation system which has access to nearby railroad lines, passenger and freight airlines, and 4 major interstate highways. Our guest today is Dennis Wilmsmeyer. He has been its executive director for about 2 years. Mr. Wilmsmeyer joined the Port District in 1999 after 12 years in transportation planning and project management. He manages the Port District's day-to-day operations and the redevelopment of a former U.S. Army base. Today we will be discussing what river port districts do and the importance of the Tri-City Regional Port District to Madison County, Illinois. Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you very
much.
It's quite a mouthful over there as to what you do. It's actually not as it's not as complicated as some people might think, but yet it's a very, very specific series of things that you do there, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's just get started. First of all, we're talking about, for people who have been around a while, there used to be an Army base which used to have the name Mel Price on it, right?
That's correct.
Is the name Mel Price gone from it completely now?
It is in many respects, and really the Port District predates the Army-based property. The Port District itself was started in 1959, and we are a special purpose unit of local government. Mm-hmm. And that's a mouthful, and people can't quite understand that.
I was going to have you explain what a Port District actually, now's the time. Okay, so since the 1950s, something existed. What is it that exists and why?
It's an entity that was really put in place by the local communities, and that's really the Tri-Cities, which is Granite City, Madison, and Venice, which came together at that point. Legislation was put in place by the Illinois legislature that created this district. And today there are about 15 public ports like us in the state of Illinois.
So this is a creature of the Illinois legislature?
Yes. The difference really from us to municipalities, any city today, is we get no general tax revenues. Mm-hmm. All of our revenue really comes from the tenants that we have on our property, the leases that we put in place. Our harbor revenue through our harbor and rail car revenue really generates all of the revenue that's associated with our facility.
So no property tax money comes
No property tax money, and that's right. It's a big misinformation out there. People don't realize that is it's a great benefit for the communities where these public ports are located throughout the state.
Mm-hmm. I bet nobody's asked you this. Do you pay property tax?
No, we don't. We are a property tax exempt organization in that respect, but all of our tenants that we do attract to the property do pay that property tax.
Mm-hmm. And there's 1,200 acres that was the former Army base, and that is adjacent to, but is not necessarily the Port District that we're talking about.
Right, and we had about 300 acres prior to the transfer of this Army-based property, and gained another 850 or so acres in that transfer of the Army base property. So that was adjacent to our property, was right there, and then the Army base, as you mentioned, closed in 2000.
When did 2000?
And then there was a special federal conveyance legislation that was put in place by Congressman Costello that then transferred that property directly from that federal level down to the local level to us.
Mm-hmm. So then, of course, you had there's a bunch of buildings that were on that property and still are. I mean, from the past.
Right.
Some old buildings and some buildings that have some environmental problems too?
Yes, absolutely. So really the transfer of the property, we looked at it back in 2000, and this property was going to come to the Port District. So there was initially in 2001 a lease of some of the property that was put in place, primarily the housing, the apartments. And the government wanted to try to give this property away as quickly as possible. We were looking to gain these assets as quickly as possible, but we needed to know that we went through in an environmentally safe manner. Mm-hmm. So the government basically was clearing property from an environmental standpoint, going through that process. and then would transfer that to us. First was a lease, and then beginning in 2002 was the actual conveyance. The lease was a mechanism really to start that property transfer, get it going basically, and making that transfer a whole lot easier for us.
Did I hear you say there was former military housing?
Yes.
And is it still housing?
There is still military housing, or old military housing on the property, 150 apartment units, and a couple of single family homes there.
By the way you said that, there's nobody living in these.
There are today. So
really?
when we received the property, there's a bit of a long story there, but the government was, as they were downsizing, they were shipping soldiers out of the area. And we knew at that point we were going to get the property. We tried to talk them into keeping the soldiers there in these units, keeping that occupancy up. In the meantime, they're sending them everywhere and shipping them off to different locations. So with that lease of the property, we were able to kind of hold that and keep it in abeyance to where we would operate the apartments. And then once we gained ownership, we were able to start bringing that occupancy level back up again. Today, really, we still have a fair amount of military members that are living in those apartments, but just the downsizing in the St. Louis region for military personnel, it's been, really, we had to open it up to the public sector here recently, and have now quite a few of the just residents, private citizens in the region now that are leasing from us.
Now, to get to your property, how do you drive there?
From Illinois, just from 270, you take that south on Illinois Route 3, and we're about 8 miles from the highway. We're just a few minutes from downtown St. Louis, taking Interstate 70 to the east and exit at McKinley Bridge, cross McKinley Bridge, and we're just a mile north of the bridge there.
On Route 3? On
Route 3.
Right. So your entranceway is right off of Route 3?
Right. We have 4 or 5 entrance points, Bissell Street, Niedringhouse Avenue, Rock Road, and North Street today, and 20th Street as well.
Okay, so let's actually before we move on to the port itself, let's finalize the acreage that you have. What 25, 50 years from now, what would you hope was going on this 1,200 acres?
I hope we have it completely filled up, and we're doing very good in that respect.
Doing what?
Industry, primarily. We have a great network of rail on the property, obviously the river and the harbor connections. South Harbor, which we can talk about here, is our next planned investment, and we're moving toward that. But certainly it's, from an industry standpoint, really trying to, manufacturing jobs, distribution jobs, that sort of thing is really what we're pushing for in populating this 1,200 acre piece of property.
And you have 75 businesses
About
there
75 tenants today, that's correct.
And of that 75, how much are we filling out this 1,200 acres?
We're down to parcel size. I mean, initially when we had this conveyance of property from the Army that came to us, we had parcels that were 150 and 200 acres in size. We're now down to about 50 acres is the largest parcel that we have available. And even some of our larger parcels now are being held in reserve for this new South Harbor development, knowing that we're going to need support operations to support the facilities and development of that South Harbor.
And what kind of work are these businesses doing?
We have everything from an ethanol plant that's that's Abengoa Bioenergy, that's producing 88 million gallons of ethanol per year, and using our rail infrastructure to for both bringing in their inbound product as well as the export of that product. Their dry distiller grains, which is a byproduct of that ethanol making process. We have an air dome manufacturer that actually is making air-supported structures. This is a large facility here, and they're shipping these out and exporting these to China. And a lumber distribution company that's actually making wood panel systems for the housing market. Just a variety of tenants that can use the rail, the truck interface, as well as the barge, and then some that don't either. We do have a fair number of office tenants that are just there because the availability of very good office space in a great location.
And what sort of industries or businesses are you pitching to try and get them to come?
Manufacturing and distribution primarily in that sector. They're just, with the rail, there is just a huge push now in the country for rail. and rail access.
What do you mean a huge push for rail?
From a standpoint of getting access directly to these manufacturing companies with rail. Some of these don't want to truck their product from the nearest rail yard over to their facility. They'd like rail right at their location. And what we're seeing is some of these main carriers throughout the country pulling back now, because years ago many of these companies were served directly by rail. Over time, companies leave and go, and as attrition continues, it makes it very costly for a rail carrier to make a one-stop to a company that might be off of their main line or off of a spur off of a main line. And so here, what we're trying to do is consolidate many of these companies that can use that rail infrastructure, bring them all onto one location, and it makes it very cost-effective for the rail to operate there.
Who operates the rail through there?
We have a direct service on the North Harbor by Norfolk Southern, and at our south property, the old Army base property, is by Norfolk Southern and Terminal Railroad. And then in addition, we went out years ago, we just wanted excellent service for our tenants, so we actually contracted with a company called Port Harbor Railroad, which is a Class 3 rail carrier. They then grab the cars or bring the cars that are delivered and take those to each one of the tenants, consolidate the cars that are going back out again, and bring all those back out to one pickup spot for the rail carriers, Norfolk Southern and Terminal.
Now, these manufacturers that are needing or wanting rail service, they must be manufacturing some pretty heavy things that are bulky, that are better shipped by rail car than by truck. Is that
typically? Yes, and sometimes it could be bulky, it could be oversized, it could be palletized products or whatever the case is, but certainly sometimes too it just depends on where it's coming, what part of the country is it coming from. If it's coming all the way from the West Coast, it's certainly, usually if it's a large enough volume, is much cheaper to bring it by rail than it is to truck it all the way across country, if you're talking numerous truckloads.
Well, yeah, railroads are very, I don't want to say inexpensive, but are very cost effective compared to the convenience of being able to use even a double bottom truck.
Yes, absolutely.
Although that's convenient in that it can go anywhere.
Yes.
Where there's not rails.
Correct.
Which is how rails got into trouble over the last half century. Okay, let's move on to your port. And let's talk about that. And that was the reason that we actually have this conversation, rather than the part that we've already started with. But I have an interest in port districts, so you're here to talk about what goes on in terms of the river, and we all know what barges look like if you've been around the river at all. And so let's start just explaining to people what those barges are doing, what the port district does with them.
Okay. From in terms of what we do in particular, and it's really our tenants who operate our harbor facility. We're a relatively small staff of only 30 people that take care and manage and maintain this 1,200 acres of property. So we rely on our tenants, our operators, to unload these barges or load them back up again, depending on the product and where it's coming from or going to.
So it's not your staff that
it is not our staff. That's correct.
That.
That's right. And our tenants do a fantastic job. They've been in the business and the industry for many, many years. Lewis and Clark Marine, that handles the actual operation of the towboats and moving the barges into place. Bulk service, mid-coast.
Is this their boats?
Yes.
Their boats, they are loading and unloading their boats on your facility.
Correct.
Okay.
And so they bring them in and unload the rail cars into these barges. A barge will hold 1,500 tons of product or thereabouts. And typically at our location northward, which is Locks 27 right there in Granite City.
Can I get you to pause there for just 1 second, just so that people have some idea of the difference between a barge and a tractor trailer. How many tractor trailers worth of stuff is in this 1,500?
Well, typically, and I can break it down by barge, but if we go on a barge tow basis, which is 15 barges put together, and that's 22,500 tons. And so if you compare that to rail cars, you mentioned rail, which is rather efficient, that's 225 rail cars or over 1,000 trucks worth of product.
So 1,000 trucks go into one of these barges.
One of these barge tows. Right. And that is just a huge benefit. Barge transportation's the second most important environmentally efficient transportation mode, pipelines being the first.
Cheap too.
And very inexpensive, right?
Yeah.
Compared when you're talking about that amount of product.
If you're moving grain, I mean, grain is not a high profit item anyway, so you really need to get your transportation costs down. So you can put huge amounts of grain into a barge and move it from, you know, the northern Midwest all the way down to Louisiana.
Absolutely.
For not cheap, but relatively inexpensive compared to
the
trucks.
That's compared to trucks
train.
Or the rail. That's correct.
Okay. So now, as to your facilities, go on.
Right. So our tenants, our operators, move about 3 to 3.5 million tons of product each year by barge through our facility, and that's year in, year out in terms of loading and unloading. We have a fair amount of that is grain or grain-related products that's bound for export.
So your farmers are bringing it in?
We have farmers that bring it in. We have rail cars that bring it in from many parts of the country that is purchased, brought in. So we bring in both by truck and by rail. Mm-hmm. That's offloaded. Very little storage that we have on the property. It's usually one barge worth of storage, one silo that we have there, because we're constantly loading those barges. And so that then gets loaded to the barges, then is headed south for export. Steel is another big commodity that we handle. U.S. Steel is located about a mile from our property, and all of their outbound steel coils that are bound for export come over by rail to our facility. They're offloaded into barges, and those go south as well. Mm-hmm. In the return, we have asphalt oil and fertilizer are two primary commodities that are coming back to the north again and being brought into that Granite City, Madison, Venice area.
Is that for use there, or that's for
all over,
transshipment out?
The asphalt oil that's coming in primarily will go to the local asphalt plants where they'll mix it with rock and that sort of thing. It's a very heavy, thick liquid that they bring in there and store in the large tanks that then go out by truck to the local asphalt plants. Mm-hmm. So that then gets used on all the roads in the St. Louis region. Mm-hmm.
You do have 4 major highways. Nearby you've got Interstate 64, Interstate 44, 55, and 70, right?
Correct.
Plus 270
yes.
and 255 to go around St. Louis. And that's your truck traffic, right? Are these trains then, do they go from your property somewhere else and get hooked up with a bunch of other trains, or are they just taking off from there and on to California or to the East Coast?
Right, it depends on the commodity, the product, where it's going to, and that sort of thing. So typically we don't have today a whole lot of unit trains, which is going to be the 60 to 70 cars, could be up to 125 cars of one product. That's what's referred
coming
to as
out of your
right.
out of your facility.
We don't necessarily have that today. That's something that certainly in the very near future we look to have. Mm-hmm. But more than anything, we have those unit trains that are coming in today, which is bringing that single commodity, primarily of grain, into our facility to load onto barges. Mm-hmm. The nice thing is we have Terminal Railroad Association that we're hooked up with, connected with. Terminal Railroad is owned by all the Class 1 carriers in the St. Louis region, and so really any rail carrier that one of our tenants wants to hook up with, they can get directly to them through Terminal Railroad. So it's just a matter of Terminal Railroad picking up the cars and taking them to the CSX or the Union Pacific or Burlington Northern, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm.
Now, when I think of like Long Beach or the harbor of New York, you see these big ships coming in, and then this crane reaches over and it grabs this box, and then it takes it, puts it down.
Right.
On the shore, or it puts it right onto a truck, which then just drives it away. You're doing the same thing, right?
Not yet. From a container standpoint, we don't do that today, but that's something certainly that the St. Louis region has looked at. How can we make this cost effective and affordable? And that's one thing we're going through now. South Harbor really is where we believe that can happen in the future for the region and for our port district.
And what's the refit cost on that?
We're going through now a $30 million project. We haven't quite kicked it off yet. We've got a Corps of Engineer requirement that we're going through now with building.
Here we go with the Corps again. We just had this discussion over the levee districts.
Right. And it actually has to do with the levees. So we are actually building a project for the Corps of Engineer. It was a requirement of them approving. They said, we'll approve your project if you go and build this for us. So we're actually enhancing the levee system and working with the contractor. They should be starting here in the next couple of weeks. putting this Corps of
in the
Engineering
Les
project.
Sturman group?
We are very involved in the levee setup, and I've known Les for a lot of years, so we've been working together very closely on the project that he's facing now, and we've been trying to assist wherever we can in that project.
So getting past the levee part, are we talking about a refit that's going to include containerization?
Very possible, and what we're looking at right now is basically digging a big hole adjacent to the levee after we go through the fortification process here of the levee, and creating a new harbor that will, it's about 800,000 cubic yards of material we need to move for this. But will be below LOX 27, puts us in a very good competitive advantage up and down the river system, and will allow then barges to come into this facility for offload. That could be for liquid, for dry bulk product, and or for containers. And we're looking at now how can we best structure that. We've been meeting with the rail lines and locally with others that operate some of these container terminal facilities to see how they're structured today. It's totally different today than what it was even 5 years or 10 years ago. Inspections of containers have to be done. It's very manual, labor-intensive prospect if you're running one of these. These are all now changing over to a very sophisticated, intelligent system of cameras and allowing the truck driver into a certain area but not to other areas, that sort of thing.
You know the term China Hub?
Yes.
Okay. How is China Hub figuring into your thinking?
Well, we actually sit on the World Trade Center Board of Directors, so we've been involved in that.
St. Louis.
St. Louis,
World.
correct. St. Louis World Trade
let's
Center.
make sure people
Yes.
understand that.
So
it's in Clayton.
Yes, it is. And we have been very supportive of the China Hub project. We've also been very supportive with Mid-America Airport. We're working with both groups, both entities. We hope at least one of them, if not both, succeed in that quest for getting additional air cargo flights from China to the St. Louis region and our area. It's so much an opportunity for us, something that we have not seen in the past, and we look at it as a win in St. Louis is a win for Southwestern Illinois and vice versa, and we really need to raise this up and support it as much as we can.
My understanding is that the Chinese would love to be able, rather than go all the way, well, they would love to be able to use the Mississippi River as
Yes.
a middle distribution point
Yes.
instead of sending their cargo in from New York or from Long Beach. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Absolutely. And
what's what would be the advantages to the United States and to the Chinese of that?
It all comes down to cost of distribution, and however you can get it distributed as cheaply as possible, as inexpensively as possible. And that's really one thing we're looking at for the St. Louis region. We're in the center of the country. Let's take advantage of it. We haven't done that in the past, and as much as we should. Distribution and taking advantage of our rail network, our highway infrastructure, our air infrastructure, the river itself. There is a great parallel between the Mississippi River system and the Yangtze River in China. They've made excellent use of their river systems there with barges going up and down, and the amount of products moving is just incredible. Here, we just haven't quite gotten there yet.
I'm surprised that they haven't come to you and said, we'd like to build.
Build here?
Yes, build these facilities
Yes.
so that we will be able to make use for our own use.
Yeah, absolutely. We're starting to get some of those interests now from them. We had a transportation forum here in St. Louis in January, where we started making
January
some inroads.
2012?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
this past, correct. And we've started making some inroads there with a lot of interest from them in terms of the facilities here in the United States. It was here in St. Louis for a reason that they wanted to hold that transportation forum, because of, again, that location being right on the Mississippi River system and the parallels associated with here in China. We are seeing some interest from the Chinese about investing in new products. We've had some prospective companies come to us and say they want to put up a new facility of a particular kind, and doing their due diligence now about what is the market for it, what's it look like, where does it go, and how much is this going to cost.
We got about 4 minutes here
Okay.
left. Is there anything that you wanted to cover that we haven't at this point?
Inland rivers, ports, and terminals. We chatted briefly earlier, but there are 12,000 miles of navigable rivers in the United States. People don't realize that. It's just it's a fascinating thing that the river system itself is just underutilized today. We don't take full advantage of it. People don't think about barges and barge transportation unless they're crossing a bridge and happen to see one. And to know that that's taking off potentially 1,000 trucks off the roadway when you're sitting in traffic the next time crossing one of these rivers, it's a phenomenal thing about we need to be pushing more of our product to the river system. We have our president, we have our governor, Pat Quinn, pushing for exports in this country, but yet we don't seem to want to fund and utilize the river system like we should. Roads get...
Who is it that doesn't want to do this?
It's just the structure, the system. The federal government today pays for improvements to the roadway system, and we're caught in this cycle of 80 to 85% of the funds come down to fund improvements to the roadway system. And what does that do? It encourages more trucks in many cases. The more highways we build and the easier we make it for people to travel, it encourages more trucks on that road that then damage the roads, and we're back in that cycle of continually funding that. So really from that standpoint, if we could put some more funding toward the river system, toward the lock and dams, levee systems and that sort of thing, to be able to keep those rivers open for navigation. The barges are the most cost-effective, environmentally friendly modes of transportation that we have, and yet we seem to be pushing them aside for carbon-emitting things such as trucks.
Is St. Louis the most northern port that doesn't freeze up regularly in the winter?
We certainly say that. The most northerly ice-free port is the St. Louis region, and obviously that depends on from year to year. This last year was very mild, so you had a lot of rivers that were free-flowing pretty much throughout the winter time last year, further north of us. But on a year-in, year-out basis, yes.
And anything else that you want to cover? Because we got about like 2 minutes.
Okay. I would like to mention SITE, Leadership Council, Southwestern Illinois.
Yes.
Great organization, and we have developed this SITE committee, SITE, which stands for Southwestern Illinois Transportation Enhancement. And we have kind of call it the four-legged stool, but rivers, runway, the rail, and the airports, I'm sorry, I kind of messed that up, roads and bridges, the river system, and rail network. All coming together to really what we're trying to do is prioritize improvements for each one of those modes of transportation, bringing that together and really pushing forward for hopefully federal dollars or state dollars to help fund improvements in the St. Louis region to grow that freight, to grow that traffic, to grow that distribution potential. Is
Route 3, which is the main highway in front of your business, is it going to be hooked in with the new Mississippi River Bridge?
There is a access point to the Mississippi River Bridge from Route 3 today, yes. There are still some improvements there that we're looking at in making that a limited 4-lane access highway. I think it's still going to be 2-lane in some of that area. But
you mean Route 3?
Route 3.
Yeah, they've
correct.
been talking about that for years.
Right.
I thought that they had gotten that straightened out where it was going to turn into 4 or more lanes.
And I think on a long-term basis, we've already spoken with IDOT trying to get a better interchange in the future. It will tie in though, and which is a good thing for us.
You need to get both both major congressional candidates running for Jerry Costello's seat to commit one way or the other as to what their thought processes are there. We've run clean out of time. I want to thank you very, very much for being with us today. Thank you. And we're going to have you back again and have further discussions about the Port District.
I'd like that. Thank you.
I've been speaking with Dennis Wilmsmeyer. He is the Executive Director of the Tri-Cities Port District. I can't remember the official name. Thank you very much.